Virtual reality was a big discussion point in the video game world leading up to 2016. Independent projects like the Oculus Rift helped fuel this discussion after funding crazy amounts of money through Kickstarter. Even after a tremendous fundraising, they received even more corporate backing from internet's favorite big brother and your eventual social media overlord, Facebook, who ended up buying the Oculus Rift and company as a whole for more money than the GDP of some small countries. This opened the floodgates of potential for the company as well as the technology incorporated within it. When people started talking about VR as a technology, it was not solely a discussion about which production company was going to have the best experience or the best software, but rather who would reach the development finish line first, as they would be the pioneers for the industry as a whole to introduce the new technology into the average consumer household. The problem is that instead of exploding with the fury of 1,000 Asian men's orgasms at the newest hentai, it sort of dribbled out with the force of someone suffering from a narrow urethra. Make sure you hit that subscribe button while we talk about the current decline and inevitable demise of the PlayStation VR system. When the PlayStation VR was announced for a fall release of 2016, people started getting excited. A lot of talk about what games could and would be coming to VR was incredibly common. Now you can experience your favorite games one step closer to reality with the ability to have an innovative experience that has never been seen before. Tech demos started to pop up at many major conventions that year. Yours truly even got to experience the Resident Evil 7 demo at San Diego Comic-Con. Having recently played the non-VR demo on PlayStation, I was enthralled at the possibility of what awaited for me inside the Baker household. Turns out it was just the kitchen demo that was going to be included in the demo disc with the headset anyways. Rather than a traditional demo, it was more of what they call an experience. But this experience was more on par with a glorified movie, like the 4D seats that shake around like an epileptic seizure every time there is an explosion in a Michael Bay film. While unique and interesting, there was no gameplay associated with the kitchen demo. You sit in a chair, you die, and then a group of volunteer handlers give you a t-shirt before pushing you out the door in order to Febreze the seat down for the next guest. But it didn't matter because Resident Evil 7 was going to be a full game in VR, fighting zombies and stopping a terrible outbreak. Fast forward to October 12th, 2016, the day before the launch of the PlayStation VR. I went to my local GameStop to see the crowds of sweaty nerds lined up at 9 p.m. for release of the headset. When I arrived, I was shocked to see no sweaty nerds or any customers at all in the GameStop. I walked in and asked the clerk what was going on. I mean, clearly a system that had this much hype and this much press would clearly sell out in the first hour of release, right? Well, turns out that wasn't the case. The clerk told me they had a total of 5 units in stock, with one of them being the premium bundle that came with the PlayStation Move controllers. Really, Sony? Along with a copy of VR Worlds, which is more of a legitimate demo disc than any of these so-called experiences. Plus, the VR Worlds actually had some interesting demos on it. Things like the London Heist, which while short, I actually had a decent time playing through it and I kinda wish there was more to it. All in all, this seems like an awesome story game for VR. It seemed like something that had more than enough potential and quality to be made into a full game regardless of how cheesy it was. But at the time of launch, there was only one real game associated with the PlayStation VR. Eve Valkyrie. Essentially an Eve space shooter game in a first-person view. The ability to look around and search for your enemies while riding in the cockpit of a space fighter seems like a perfect launch game for something of this caliber. Most of the other launch games were mediocre at best. Until Dawn Rush of Blood was interesting primarily because I really liked the Until Dawn game, but at its core it was just an arcade-style rail shooter, and a rather unimpressive one at that. Throughout the rest of the year, it was pretty uneventful. There was no AAA game to really make people go, wow, I need that VR headset in my life. Some companies released companion content. Tomb Raider had a VR experience that allowed you to explore the Croft Manor. Even Star Wars Battlefront had a free... You feeling okay about that, EA? Demo that would allow you to pilot an X-Wing over the Death Star. It was neat, but it wasn't anything amazing. Then that fateful night finally came in January with Resident Evil 7. The first big AAA game was going to be released to the masses. The hype was huge ever since the first demo was released, people calling it the spiritual successor to what PT/Silent Hills was supposed to be. I was even ballsy enough to get the $180 special edition from GameStop. And then we got to play it, and it was exactly what the crowd wanted. A game that used the VR as an additional level of experience to the player, but was neither a requirement to enjoy the game, nor a shoehorned piece of content that was added as an afterthought. It was a game that was fun and enjoyable when playing with or without VR. For a time it was good, so saith the Lord. Book of Jorna, Chapter 4, Verse 20, #BlazeIt. Once the initial excitement had died down from Resident Evil, eyebrows around the country started to raise in regards to what the next big game was going to be. And that's what most of the video game world is about. See game, get game, play game, repeat. The problem was there wasn't a whole lot on the horizon. Some games had a VR portion forced into it in order to serve as a selling point, but it wasn't compelling content that made people say, I gotta play that in VR. Sure, Gran Turismo was coming out with a VR mode, and maybe that's your thing if you're a racing guy. Not me. But for the most part, the VR aspect of most major published games was just a bonus that had no real reason to be in there. It's almost like Sony told the developers that there need to be VR aspects to some of these games in order for them to promote them in the proper setting. Then you also have the independent games, which are neat as a concept, but many of them don't need VR. Why the fuck do I need VR in a 1,000-foot giant robot golf? Where are the VR sports games? Where are the VR action games? Where are the VR games? Fast forward to today, almost 2 years since the initial launch of PlayStation VR, and what do we have to show for it outside of the previously described Resident Evil? Well, there's a Rick and Morty game, and let's not forget Star Trek Bridge Commander, and a bunch of other filler games that will cost $20 and only provide you about 1 to 2 hours of gameplay. It wasn't all bad though. Superhot VR was actually a really cool concept that absolutely plays better on something like the Oculus Rift because you have more room for movement. Moss was interesting, but it seems more like a puzzle game that was adjusted towards the end of production to become a VR game, and Golem still has a lot of interesting possibility, but here we are almost a full year since its first announced release date and the game is on indefinite hold. But where are the killer games? Where's the Madden game that allows you to play as Tom Brady deflating a football prior to a game? Yes, I went there. We have gotten versions of Skyrim and Doom that are essentially ports to VR that remove a lot of what the core games were trying to accomplish, but no real game. A game for the VR gamers. Who will speak for us? Especially who will speak for us who bought one of the 2 million units that were sold in just over a year? At this year's E3, we saw a grand total of, and you better believe I broke out the abacus to double check my math, 1 total game for VR. And surprisingly enough, it's actually being produced from Dark Souls and Bloodborne developer From Software. News of this developer working on a VR game is the definition of left field, as I would never in a million years have guessed that they were working on something like this, what with all the Dark Souls money that they are Scrooge McDuck diving into. The game in question, Déraciné, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. The game looks interesting as an adventure narrative game where you must interact with items in a 3D world similar to Moss. It does look stylized enough to at least warrant a close examination when or if a demo is released, but it is by no means on my must-buy list. With the lack of direct support from Sony and their first-party studios, I have an incredibly deep and unending fear that the PlayStation VR may not be long for this world. After seeing the quick and unsupported deaths of the PlayStation Move on PS3, PlayStation TV, and the PlayStation Vita, I would be lying if I said I'm not concerned about the short and medium-term lifespan of the PlayStation VR. Sony has officially stated in an earnings call that the PlayStation 4 is entering its end-of-life stage as a consumer product. Combine that statement with the recent price drops of the PlayStation VR to $199 brand new, exactly 50% markdown from the release 2 years ago, with the fact that the PS VR hardware will most likely be outdated and outmoded by the time the PlayStation 5 releases around 2020, I feel that the PlayStation VR is pretty much dead in the water, and Sony most likely has no real plans to monetize it or create more units past what they currently have in inventory, as I'm sure all of their internal support is being focused on the next generation system. Sony is like the one-man medicine show from the 1800s where a doctor will come into town talking about this brand new and exciting tonic that'll cure what ails you. But by the time you find out it's made from snake eggs and piss, they've already skipped town with your hard-earned money. Now, I'm willing to admit that I could be mistaken on this idea, and Sony could be planning an amazing revitalization of the PlayStation VR as we speak, but judging from their business decisions in the past regarding their PlayStation peripherals and accessories, I have no reason to believe that they are trying their hardest to save the PlayStation VR. And in all reality, no pun intended, it really is too bad as the system was quite fun when it had proper software support. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure you adhere to the 3 pillars of YouTube, click that subscribe button, like the video, and ring the bell for notifications. My name is Ben Joarna, everybody, that's Joarna, and I will see you all next time.